Good Little Boys Go to Heaven, written by Stukin, available on Amazon. Part 3 of 25. I Give Him Back. Spring 1939, East Texas. The car pulled up to the front of the church and stopped. I left the back seat and my mother followed. Many people stood out in front, but they parted, offering us a path between them. The preacher was waiting for us in the entryway. He reached out his hand to me and we shook. He nodded to my mother and said, "Be strong, Sister Jameson." She nodded her head in response. We entered the church with the other family members following. Two aisles divided the pews into three sections. We started down the right-hand aisle. I looked from left to right and saw people standing in front of the pews throughout the church. It was a small church, but the circumstances made it look much larger. There were more people than you might see on Easter Sunday, or maybe more than for Christmas services. I had not considered the size of the turnout for my brother Jack's funeral. I was somewhat lost as to what to think. Few of these folks had said a word or given a thought to Jack. I glanced to my right and saw him standing in front of one of the pews near the back. He looked straight at me but gave no sign of a greeting. I stared at him for a few moments to give him a chance to give a gesture, a nod of his head, or maybe some sort of "Hello, how you been?" He looked right through me and then turned away. He had to know who I was. I had not seen him in over a year, but a year is not nearly long enough to forget a son. He was my father. I looked at my mother to see if she saw him also, but when I turned back to where I had seen him before, he was not there. My father's family came to our house a few days before Jack's funeral. I answered their knocking on our front door. I looked at the 5 or 6 folks standing at the door whom I had never seen before. A tall man with heavy gray beard and fierce blue eyes spoke. "I'm your daddy's daddy, boy. Open the door and let us in." That was a strange time for him to introduce himself to me. I opened the screen door and stepped aside, allowing them to walk past me. They stood in the front hallway, milling about, their attention focused within the bounds of their group. I stood behind them until my grandfather turned to me and said, "Where is your mama, boy? We're here to see her." They could have seen my mama if they had turned around to look. She, the preacher, and a few church ladies were seated quietly in the parlor to the hallway's left. You could see into the parlor from the hallway, but these kinfolks never thought to turn around and look. My mama's head was down, but she looked up when we entered the room. When she saw the tall man, she sighed, and the look she showed she recognized and expected to see him. She rose and walked up to him, reaching out her hand for him to shake. "We shouldn't be meeting after such a long while under these circumstances," was how he started. "We know he was a good boy, our young John Jr. It's our loss we never got to know him." She frowned and nodded. Then she turned her attention to the short, round woman who stood at my grandfather's side. The short, round woman smiled slightly and reached out her arms to my mama. They embraced as if they were friends. They might have been friends years ago before they made their break. The break was made a year or so before I was born. "You were barely walking and you weren't yet born," is how my father timed the separation between his parents and himself in words to Jack and me. "Your mother and I weren't getting along again, and I went to where I felt I would be welcome." He showed up at his folks' house in the middle of the night. His banging on the door met with angry words from his father. "John, are you ever sober? Do you spend any time out of the bottle? You should be home with your wife and baby. You have to be a man and stop running here whenever your home feels unwelcoming. We have had enough. You won't be welcomed into the house this time. You can't continue to show up here drunk and expect us to tolerate your lack of respect for us and your lack of respect for yourself," were the words he heard from his father. "If you're going to act like a dumb animal, you'll be sleep out in the barn." My father grabbed my grandfather by the robe and told her, "I'll knock you to your knees if you don't get out of my way." He tried to push his way past my grandfather, who slapped him. My father gave a quick tug to my grandfather's robe and threw him to the ground. He bent down to help my grandfather up, but my grandfather wouldn't let my father touch it. Get your hands off me, my grandfather said. Get off this land and don't ever come back. My shotgun will greet you if I ever see you here again. That's the story my father told Jack and me. He walked away, and from what he told Jack and me, he never set foot on my grandparents' land again. Some of it may be true. It doesn't make sense that a father and son could break for good over what seems like next to nothing. Even my grandfather's disappointment in my father shouldn't justify a permanent break, at least not in my mind. Maybe my father was just unable to find his way home. People get lost in life, I hear. My grandfather was tall and lanky. I can see how my father could easily throw him down. He must have been at least 6 foot 6 inches tall, probably weighed around 180 pounds. My father was about the same height, but carried quite a few more pounds. My grandmother looked about the same age as her husband, mid-60s or so. She was more than a foot shorter. She had long gray hair, which she let hang down but tied in the back. With her round face and lips red with lipstick, she looked like I would have imagined her if I'd ever thought to imagine her. She was a very peaceful looking woman. We sat in the front row, middle pew, a couple of feet from the coffin. I sat on my mother's right with my grandfather on her left. My grandfather sat next to my grandmother. On my right side were other relations of my father. I still don't know their names, and I'm not sure a word was passed between me and any of them, but we reached the point where we would greet each other with a warm head nod. My mother had no relations other than me that I knew of. Anyway, it occurred to me for the first time. I looked over at my grandparents. Both were looking straight ahead. The preacher took his post and began to speak. Young John Jameson, Jr., a boy of just 18 years, is in a better place now. In this world of man, we struggle to find meaning and peace. But in heaven, where young John Jr., just 18 years old, now rests, meaning is clear, peace is found. He knows, he rests. You must find comfort in your faith. You must rest your heavy hearts. It is accepted that you will be sad, perhaps with a lingering sadness forever. But you must not despair. You can never despair. I know these words that are meant to comfort might seem hollow, particularly when the loss is of a person so young, just 18 years old. But it is really only through faith that you can find acceptance of things that might cause you to question everything in life. Only in faith can these hollow words be given depth and meaning. You must look inside yourself. You must find some sense of comfort. A tragedy can be disheartening, but you must find the heart. A tragedy can demoralize, but you must find strength in your faith in God. You must accept what is past. You must find the heart. You must remain strong. You must endure. The preacher struggled to find words. His actual words were even more confused than my repeated version of them. And he had no words about Jack's life, and no one gave testimony as to what a fine fellow Jack was. No one talked of Jack's promise that had been lost. No one had a word, kind or otherwise, for Jack, including me. I had shared a bedroom with Jack my entire 16 years, and no kind word about him came to mind. I wouldn't have had a kind word for myself either. The preacher went on for what seemed like well over an hour. Mama held her composure the entire time. I could see my grandparents getting antsy out of the corner of my eye. The relations on my right grew even more restless. The preacher noticed none of this. My mother had already shed tears for Jack, and she seemed to be in a state I might best describe as stunned. The preacher's job might have been easier if he could have read her feelings. He'd spent almost the entire hour looking at my mother, but she gave him nothing. She had given all she had for and to Jack. Finally, the preacher ended his performance with a heavy sigh. The preacher's sermons were always uneven. His long pauses were sometimes tiring. He frequently rambled, but our congregation had gotten used to the sound of his voice. After 10 or 12 years, we had gotten used to his mannerisms. We came to view his quirkiness as endearing. He couldn't master the crowd, but he could gain its support. We'd sit quietly, willing him to complete each sermon successfully. But he was on his own this day. I don't remember him having stood for a funeral before, and he seemed lost a few times. He was desperate to comfort a crowd that sought no comfort. I hadn't been to a funeral before, but I can't imagine his words were words that would have brought comfort to anyone. I noticed how badly the preacher's black suit was for the first time. It was the same suit he wore every Sunday, but I saw how worn it was for the first time. I sat observing him for an hour. I observed his clothes, manner, and appearance as if for the first time. His movements seemed even more exaggerated than I had noticed. His voice seemed more strained than I had heard, and his facial expression seemed almost tortured. My mother has always found comfort in religion, in the arms of Jesus, in the preacher's words, maybe just the preacher's manner and voice. Religion has had a useful purpose for her. I have been unable to find a useful purpose for it. I have been unable to find comfort. Comfort has always been what I needed most. Jesus never embraced me. He never did. And today maybe he provided no open arms, no comfort for my mother either. Mrs. Cook, the lady who usually led the song in congregation, even though she couldn't carry a tune very far, sang Just a Closer Walk with Thee at the funeral. She sang without accompaniment. We could not afford an organ or an organist. We had a guitar player who tried to play along with her singing for a short while, but his playing was even worse than her singing. After the preacher asked him to stop playing during our gatherings, he left the church. Mrs. Cook could not sing well, but she could sing loud and clearly, which I suppose is more important than perfectly carrying a tune. After Mrs. Cook finished, the Reverend invited everyone up to see the body. I could not go up to view it again, so I was relieved when Mama also chose to hold her seat. The relatives to my right and my grandparents did not pass up the opportunity to say goodbye to someone none of them had seen since he was 1 year old. My mother and I went to the funeral parlor after the mortician called to say Jack's body was ready. I hesitated at the door, but when my mother turned, looked at me, and gave me a nod, I followed her in. I could see the coffin from the doorway, but not the body inside it. I followed my mother up to the coffin and looked inside at Jack's face. He looked terrible. The gash over his left eye still showed through the makeup job done by the mortician. No one should have viewed that body. I know the mortician did the best he could, but no one should have viewed that body. No one should have seen what I had done. I can only imagine what went through the minds of those who chose to view his body one last time. On our way up the aisle, I looked for my father in the crowd. I did not see him. I wanted to see him again just to be sure it was him I'd seen before. Maybe he had been there only in my mind. No one else had made note of his presence. I had not heard his voice. I had yet to hear his name called. We had not heard from him since he left us. I honestly couldn't closely guess how many years. I did not have any idea of where he was or what he was doing. I did not know if he was alive. I had not even thought about him showing up for Jack's funeral. I knew it was him, though, even though I'd only caught a glimpse of him. We got back into the car that the funeral home had provided and headed for the cemetery where my mother's people buried their dead. For the 10-minute drive, she sat staring straight ahead, saying nothing. I sat staring at her, quietly pleading with her to say something to me. The car stopped and the door on my side opened. I got out and my mother followed. We walked a short distance to 3 rows of metal chairs that faced the hole. The pallbearers walked up to the grave carrying the coffin. They placed it on the device used for lowering coffins into the ground. We sat. The preacher walked up to the opposite side of the coffin and opened his Bible. He read a passage from his Bible and then closed it. He walked up to my mama, touched her on the shoulder, and simply said, "Please be strong." He walked past us. Mama sat in a daze in a metal folding chair. I can imagine what it was doing to her to have lost a husband and a son in a short period. All she had left was me. That was a pretty sad thought for her. I looked for my father there at the gravesite. I'm unsure why I was so interested in whether he showed. He never had any interest in me and never much acknowledged my presence much. His family was there, and his parents sat beside us. His mother and my mother embraced and tried to console each other. I stayed close to hear what they were saying. It was all about how terrible it was to lose a child at such a young age. They did not mention my father. From what I heard, his parents did not mention him at all. People began to leave. My mom and I held back in our metal chairs looking at the coffin that held my brother Jack. My father's family took their leave when my mama told them she wanted to be alone with her two men, Jack and me. They reluctantly left us there alone. They promised to keep in touch. The only thought I had in my head was to go up to Jack's coffin, open it, and crawl in. I was the one who should have been laid to rest that day. He walked up to the other side of the coffin. He had appeared from nowhere. He stood with his hands clasped before him, his head down as though in prayer. He was not a praying man, though, and I am unsure what could have been going through his mind. I looked over to my mama to see her staring at him. The look on her face was blank. He looked like he had aged 10 years. I could not tell if he was sober or not, but he did not stagger. But I had never noticed a stagger. He always seemed to be drunk, but always had the look of a sober man. He'd grown a full beard, still jet black. He had worn only a thin mustache for as long as I can remember. I remember Jack and me watching him shave. He would look at Jack, tell him he would be shaving soon, so he'd better pay close attention to see how it was done. He raised his head from the coffin and looked straight ahead, right past Mama and me. He had the strangest look in his eyes. Those fiery eyes which once seemed so angry and mean had been doused and now seemed quiet and still. I wanted to talk to him. I had so many questions for him. Where had he been? How did he find out about Jack? What kind of life was he leading? What had I done wrong? I was a good son, a quiet son, the son who tried to love him even though he made it clear that he did not love me. He always seemed to hate me just for being me. I did not know what I did to cause him to hate me. Sometimes he would stare at me. I would look at him and smile. He would turn away. I was 8 or 9 when he looked at me for the last time. More than 8 years had passed since the last time he noted my existence. Maybe I was too much like my mama. I was always small like she was. My father and Jack were each more than a foot taller and much heavier than I was. Maybe he would look at me and think of her. I was soft like she was. I was timid, probably like a child who gets caught between two warring parents might be. But Jack was not shy. He had the rage of my father. My father came to hate my mother long before he left us. When he was alone with Jack and me, he sometimes talked about how she and her family thought they were better than he was. He would say she was the one who was not good enough for him. He said once that my mama was dirt and the worst thing he'd ever done was to marry her. Jack and I at first would sit there stunned and pass glances between the two of us. Eventually, we both got to where we would ignore his tirades. His nonsense made me feel closer to my mama and more distant from him. He made it clear that he hated pretty much everyone, including my mama, my mama's family, his family, and he made it clear that he hated me. But he loved Jack. He thought enough of Jack to come to Jack's funeral and say his goodbyes. They always had a relationship I could not understand. Sometimes he took his frustrations or anger out on Jack. He never laid a hand on me. He would talk to Jack. When I said he said things to Jack and me, he actually said them to Jack, and I was just there to listen. He showed Jack how to do things. Swimming. That was how Jack became a much better swimmer than I. He took Jack in the water and taught him to swim stroke by stroke, while I sat on the bank and watched. Fishing. Jack caught almost all of what we caught. I could never learn on my own how to make the worm stay on the hook, but the old man taught Jack to bait properly. And then Jack in turn just laughed at my inability to figure it out for myself. He stood there above the coffin and never looked at Mama or me. He said his goodbye to Jack, then turned and walked away. I wondered whether he would have shown up if it had been me being laid to rest. I know he would not have. That was fine with me, though. That was fine with me. He was the father I'd been given, and just then, in my heart and in my mind, I gave him back. That's it.